There's a profound shift that happens the moment you stop chasing. It's not a loud, dramatic change. It's subtle, almost imperceptible to the casual observer, but inside it is seismic. You see, when someone has been accustomed to your attention, your energy, your emotional investment, and suddenly that flow is cut off, it creates a vacuum, and vacuums by nature are uncomfortable. They pull and twist until something fills the space. You start moving on silently, without fanfare, without the urge to explain yourself or plead your case. You're doing something far more powerful than you realize. You are signaling to her that your world no longer revolves around her. You are no longer caught in the gravitational pull of old emotions, old expectations, or old patterns. And that in itself is a form of liberation. It's a reclaiming of your own center. This kind of emotional detachment is not about coldness or cruelty. It's about clarity. It's about understanding that your value, your identity, your peace don't depend on someone else's approval or presence. When you quietly withdraw without bitterness or spite, you communicate something profound, that your life is yours to live fully and authentically. What makes this moment so potent is that it is unexpected. Often, in the aftermath of a breakup, there is an anticipation, a hope, that the other person will realize what they've lost and come running back. But the reality is far more complex. The most effective way to disrupt the cycle of chasing and fleeing is to simply stop engaging in it. To stop reacting emotionally to her provocations or attempts to pull you back in. Instead, you focus on yourself, on your own growth, your own healing, your own future. And this silence, this emotional distance, it shakes her world because it challenges the story she's been telling herself. The story where she was still central to your life, where there was still a chance to reclaim what was lost. Your absence is the loudest message she receives. It speaks volumes, more than any confrontation or plea ever could. There's also a psychological mechanism at play here, something rooted deeply in human nature. When something is suddenly removed, our minds tend to fixate on it. This is a principle well known in behavioral science. Lost creates desire. The things we can't have become the objects of our focus, often magnified beyond their actual value. So when you step back and detach, the space you leave behind doesn't go unnoticed. Instead, it becomes a source of reflection, doubt, and eventually regret. But it's important to recognize that this process only works if your detachment is genuine. It cannot be a strategy rooted in manipulation or passive aggression. It must be authentic, because anything less will be detected. Emotional intelligence is about congruence. Your internal state must match your external behavior. If you're pretending to be indifferent while secretly longing for reconciliation, that energy leaks out. People sense it, and it undermines your progress. Moving on silently is a declaration of sovereignty. It's an assertion that your emotional well-being is your responsibility. And in that moment, the dynamic between you and her shifts dramatically. You are no longer available to be hurt, to be manipulated, to be drawn into drama. You reclaim your power not through force, but through presence and self-possession. Furthermore, when you are fully engaged in rebuilding your life, investing in your goals, your friendships, your passions, your transformation becomes undeniable. She can see you thriving from a distance. She senses your peace, your happiness, your strength, and that triggers a deep, often unspoken realization that the person she once had is no longer there, and that the person you have become no longer needs her in the way you once did. This shift doesn't just disrupt her perception, it changes the internal narrative she has about your relationship. The moment you detach, you remove the safety net she might have relied on, the certainty of your availability and emotional submission. Without that safety net, her sense of control begins to unravel. And it's precisely in this unraveling that regret starts to take root. You might wonder why this matters so much. Why does your silence or your emotional detachment evoke such a strong reaction? Because relationships, at their core, are built on emotional exchange and mutual dependency. When that exchange is cut off unilaterally, it forces the other person to confront what they have lost, not just in terms of companionship, but in terms of identity, influence, and future possibility. And this confrontation, though painful for her, is necessary for your growth. It marks a turning point, a moment when you are no longer trapped in the past, but stepping fully into your future. It's the beginning of healing, not just for you, but eventually for her as well, though she may not see it that way at first. In all of this, the key is to maintain your focus on your own path. Detachment is not a weapon. It is a shield. It protects your energy and allows you to cultivate the best version of yourself. And in doing so, it sends a powerful message. You are whole, you are enough, and you are moving forward without looking back. This is the moment she starts to realize the magnitude of what she let go, not because you told her, not because you fought for her attention, but because your absence filled the space with a truth she could no longer deny. And that truth is the most compelling statement you can make. There's a subtle, almost invisible process that begins the moment you truly stop reacting. When she notices you no longer respond to her provocations, no longer give her the emotional fuel she once depended on, it unsettles her deeply. This isn't just about withdrawing your presence. It's about the cessation of emotional engagement, the refusal to play the old game, and the creation of a new dynamic where you are no longer available to be manipulated or hurt. It's important to understand that this withdrawal isn't about punishment or revenge. It's a boundary, a line drawn firmly in the sand. And when you draw that line, you force a reckoning. She begins to realize that the emotional patterns she relied on to keep you close are no longer effective. The tactics she used, whether subtle or overt, to provoke guilt or draw you back in, suddenly lose their power. The space where she expected conflict, drama, or even desperate attempts at connection is met with calm, silence, and indifference. This kind of detachment is a profound form of strength. It's not weakness disguised as avoidance. It's an active choice to protect yourself and reclaim your own emotional sovereignty. When you stop feeding into the cycle of reactive emotions, you break the pattern that kept both of you locked in a toxic dance. She feels that shift immediately, even if she can't quite put it into words. The energy between you changes. The emotional current dries up. And that absence creates a void that's impossible to ignore. She might try harder, testing your boundaries in new ways, escalating her attempts to provoke a response. But the difference now is that you are prepared. You understand that your emotional responses were the currency she traded on, and by withholding that currency, you alter the entire economy of your interaction. You become less predictable, less available, and less susceptible to the manipulation she once relied on. This withdrawal of emotional reaction also forces her to confront a reality she has long avoided, the fact that you are no longer emotionally invested in the way she hoped. That realization is destabilizing because it disrupts her narrative. It challenges the identity she has crafted around your relationship, and with it, her sense of control. She may experience confusion, frustration, even anger, but beneath all of that lies a deeper fear, the fear of loss and the fear of being truly alone. When you stop reacting, you no longer provide the reassurance she unconsciously depended on, that you would always be there, ready to respond, ready to forgive, ready to return to the emotional battlefield. In this quiet space of your non-reaction, she begins to experience a type of absence that's far more powerful than words or confrontation. Your silence becomes a mirror, reflecting back to her the consequences of her own actions and the real possibility of permanent separation. It forces her to reckon with the fact that her attempts to pull you back in are failing because you have changed the rules of engagement. What you are doing here is more than just stepping away. You are cultivating an inner calm that is unshakable. This calm is not apathy, it's mastery over your emotional life. It's the realization that your well-being does not depend on her responses or approval. And this mastery is what ultimately unsettles her most. It shows that you are no longer caught in the old patterns, no longer vulnerable to the emotional chaos that once defined your connection. There is a certain dignity in this stance, a refusal to be baited into conflict, a decision to maintain your composure regardless of external attempts to disrupt it. This dignity speaks volumes. It communicates that you have moved beyond the drama, beyond the need to justify yourself. beyond the compulsion to explain or plead. And this is where regret begins to take root, because she recognizes, consciously or not, that the dynamic has shifted irreversibly. The safety net of your emotional availability has been removed. She realizes that the familiar dance they once performed together has been broken by your refusal to participate. This refusal is the most powerful statement you can make. It says, without words, that you value yourself enough to step away from pain and dysfunction, that you recognize your worth and will no longer settle for less than respect and genuine connection, that you are choosing a path of growth and healing rather than continued turmoil. As this understanding dawns on her, she begins to question the decisions she made, the words she said, and the way she treated the relationship. She feels the weight of her own responsibility for the loss. And that realization, uncomfortable as it is, can lead to a deep and profound regret. But this moment isn't just about her. It's about you reclaiming your power and breaking free from patterns that no longer serve you. It's about stepping into a version of yourself that is whole and complete, independent of external validation. By refusing to react, you not only protect yourself, you send a message about the kind of treatment you will no longer tolerate. You set a new standard for what relationships should look like, and you demand respect, not through force, but through the quiet strength of your boundaries. And so, the moment you stop reacting, you take control of your own narrative. You stop being a player in someone else's drama and start being the author of your own life. This is the true power of emotional non-reaction. It creates a space for healing, growth, and ultimately transformation. And that is why this is the moment she begins to regret what she lost. There's a moment, subtle but unmistakable, when she begins to question the security she once felt in your presence. It's not sudden, and it's rarely dramatic on the surface, but deep down it unsettles her profoundly. She starts to feel the shift, that intangible change where the familiar safety net you once provided, the emotional availability, the predictable reactions, the constant reassurance, begins to unravel. What she thought was an unbreakable bond suddenly feels fragile, uncertain, and even elusive. This feeling of insecurity is a powerful thing. It arises because the dynamic between you has changed. When you were always there, ready to respond, to engage, to soothe, or argue, she had a sense of control, a sense that no matter what happened, you were emotionally reachable. But when you begin to pull back, not out of spite or avoidance, but as a conscious act of self-preservation, she experiences a void, and this void breeds anxiety. The truth is, people, especially those who thrived on the emotional patterns you once played into, develop a kind of dependence on that predictability. They rely on it to feel grounded, to navigate their own fears and insecurities. When that predictability disappears, it's as if the ground shifts beneath their feet. It forces them to confront the possibility that what they took for granted might no longer exist. And that is terrifying. She will likely start to seek signs, any signs, that you remain the same person she thought she knew. She will test your boundaries, sometimes consciously, often unconsciously, trying to reestablish the old patterns. This is not manipulation in the simplistic sense. It's an instinctual attempt to restore stability in her world. The unpredictability, the withdrawal of emotional reactions, leaves her grasping for reassurance, for confirmation that the relationship still holds value. But as you stand firm, as you refuse to be drawn back into the old games, her insecurity grows. She begins to see the consequences of her actions reflected in your silence, your calm, your refusal to engage in the drama. This silence is not emptiness. It's a message louder than words. It tells her that the emotional safety she once had is no longer guaranteed. It challenges her to rethink her assumptions and the role she played in the unraveling of your connection. In that space of uncertainty, regret often begins to sprout. The things she dismissed or minimized before, the hurtful words, the neglect, the disregard, become impossible to ignore. The comfort of familiarity fades, replaced by the discomfort of real loss. She realizes that the stability she once relied on wasn't as solid as she believed, and that her actions contributed to its erosion. This growing insecurity can lead to a deep internal conflict for her. On one hand, she might still cling to old patterns, trying to provoke a reaction, to reclaim control, or to reignite the emotional connection she fears losing. On the other hand, She faces the stark reality that you are no longer the person who will tolerate or engage with that dynamic. This tension creates a kind of emotional limbo, a place where regret and longing mingle with frustration and confusion. It's crucial to understand that this insecurity isn't merely about losing a partner. It's about losing a part of the narrative she crafted to make sense of herself and her place in your life. When that narrative unravels, it shakes the foundation of her identity. She must now confront uncomfortable truths about her behavior, her choices, and the consequences they brought. And that confrontation is often the catalyst for true regret. It's the moment when she realizes that what she had was rare, valuable, and not easily replaced. The person you are becoming, the one who sets boundaries, demands respect, and prioritizes healing, is not someone who will come back just because she wishes it so. That realization can be painful, but it's necessary. Meanwhile, you, having stepped away from the chaos, begin to rebuild your own sense of worth and self-respect. You become less available, not out of spite, but out of necessity. This distance allows you to regain clarity, to see the relationship for what it was and what it could never be. It's in this clarity that you find freedom. The freedom to define your own boundaries and to refuse to settle for anything less than mutual respect and genuine care. Her insecurity, then, is a reflection of the loss of control she once had, a control rooted in the emotional hold she had over you. When you break free from that hold, she is left to face a reality where the old tactics no longer work. This shift changes everything. It alters the dynamic from one of dependence and manipulation to one of independence and self-ownership. This is a pivotal turning point. It marks the beginning of her regret, not because you demanded it, but because you refused to participate in the unhealthy dance any longer. By standing firm, you force her to reckon with her own choices and the impact they had. It is through this reckoning that she begins to understand what was lost. But remember, this process is not about punishing her or holding grudges. It's about honoring yourself and your journey toward healing. It's about refusing to be drawn back into patterns that drain your energy and undermine your growth. It's about creating a space where genuine connection can only happen on terms that respect your worth. So as she grapples with her insecurity, you maintain your calm, your boundaries, your sense of purpose. You do not waver. Because true strength lies in consistency and self-respect. And in that strength, you find peace. Peace that comes from knowing you will no longer sacrifice your well-being for the illusion of connection. And that is why her growing insecurity is the beginning of her deepest regret. There comes a moment after the breakup when she begins to realize the absence of your presence isn't just a physical void. It's a silence filled with unspoken truths and unmet expectations. That realization doesn't hit all at once. It creeps in gradually, like the slow fading of a shadow as the sun sets. She notices, perhaps for the first time, how much of her day was shaped by your presence, how the little things you did or said created a rhythm she took for granted. It's this absence that starts to weigh on her, stirring a profound sense of loss. But more than just missing you physically, what truly unsettles her is the recognition that you have stopped reacting the way she expected you to. She had a certain blueprint of your relationship, a predictable pattern of interactions, emotional exchanges, and even conflicts that gave her a sense of control when you are no longer available to engage on those terms, when you refuse to play the old roles and answer the calls she once made on your attention and energy. It disrupts that blueprint, and disruption breeds discomfort. It's important to understand that for many, relationships are less about love or companionship than about maintaining a sense of emotional equilibrium, however fragile or dysfunctional that may be. She clung to you not only for what you provided, but for what the relationship represented. A familiar emotional landscape where her needs and insecurities had a predictable outlet. When you withdraw, you are not just absent, you are breaking the cycle that held her steady, even if that steadiness was unhealthy. In that void, she starts to feel the sharp sting of her own loneliness and self-doubt. Without the familiar back and forth, she's left with herself and her reflections. She may begin to question the choices she made, the words she spoke, the way she treated you. Regret takes root here because she begins to see the consequences of her actions in stark relief without the distractions of constant emotional engagement. She might try to fill this emptiness with distractions, new relationships, busy schedules, or even self-improvement efforts, but these often ring hollow compared to the weight of what was lost. The absence of you becomes a silent echo, a reminder that some things cannot be replaced or forgotten so easily. This isn't merely nostalgia, it's a confrontation with the reality that the connection she once had was more valuable than she realized. Yet what she really grapples with is the understanding that your absence is not accidental or temporary. It's a deliberate boundary you've set, a clear statement that the old patterns won't resume. This boundary forces her to confront her own role in the breakdown of the relationship. She must wrestle with the fact that her behaviors, her neglect, or her emotional games contributed to this distance. It's a moment of reckoning, uncomfortable and unavoidable. This reckoning is painful because it challenges her self-position. No one likes to face their own faults or to acknowledge that they may have driven away someone who cared deeply. She may have believed she could always rely on your forgiveness or your willingness to return whenever things got rough, but when you hold firm, when you don't give in to the temptation to rekindle the familiar chaos, she begins to see that forgiveness and second chances are not endless commodities. The discomfort grows as she realizes that the power dynamic has shifted. Where once she held sway over your emotions through her actions, now she finds herself powerless to pull you back. This shift is threatening because it demands a change that requires responsibility, maturity, and genuine growth. And that is a challenge she might not be ready to meet. In this vulnerable space, regret deepens. She wishes she could rewind time, speak differently, act more kindly, show appreciation when she had the chance. The memories of missed opportunities and harsh words loom large. But regret alone isn't enough to repair what was broken. It's only the beginning of understanding the cost of her choices. Meanwhile, you stand at a crossroads too. You've chosen not to return to the old ways, not to re-enter a relationship that compromises your self-respect or peace of mind. Your absence is not a punishment, but a boundary, a necessary space to heal, to grow, and to find clarity. This absence is your statement of self-worth and your refusal to settle for anything less than a relationship built on mutual respect and care. It's crucial to maintain that boundary because the temptation to return can be strong, especially when faced with the allure of familiarity or the desire to avoid loneliness. But true strength lies in recognizing that absence is sometimes the only way to signal what is truly non-negotiable in your life. Her regret, then, is not just about missing you, it's about the dawning realization that she lost something rare, something that required her active participation to sustain. The fact that you did not come back as expected disrupts her narrative and forces her to reevaluate her choices. It's a confrontation with the reality that relationships are built on two willing participants, and when one steps away for good reasons, the other must face the consequences. In this moment, her regret becomes a mirror reflecting back to her the importance of genuine connection, respect, and growth. It's a painful lesson, but one that can lead to deeper self-awareness and, if she is willing, to meaningful change. And as you move forward, remember that your absence carries its own power. It is not silence without meaning. It is the loudest message of all. That you have chosen yourself and your well-being over the continuation of a toxic cycle. That is when regret truly begins to take hold. There is a profound moment after a breakup, when the illusion of control she once felt begins to unravel. You see, relationships, even the most dysfunctional ones, often provide a kind of emotional economy, an exchange of power, attention, and validation that keeps both parties tethered. When that tether is suddenly cut, she finds herself adrift in a sea of uncertainty. It's not just about losing you, it's about losing the sense that she can influence or predict what will happen next. That loss of control is deeply unsettling. She might have taken for granted the ways she could manipulate the dynamics, whether through emotional outbursts, silent treatments, or strategic affection, to keep you engaged. These behaviors often serve as tools to regain control when insecurity or fear creeps in. But when you no longer respond, when you refuse to be pulled back into the familiar patterns, those tools become ineffective. The power she thought she held slips through her fingers, and with it, a certain confidence and stability she relied on. This loss shakes her foundation. It confronts her with the reality that control was never truly hers to keep. It was a fragile illusion maintained by mutual dependence and repeated cycles of conflict and reconciliation. Now, without your participation, that cycle is broken, and she's forced to face the chaos beneath the surface, the uncertainty, the loneliness, and the need to navigate life without the emotional anchor you once provided. This is a critical turning point. When she realizes that her usual tactics no longer work, panic can set in. This panic isn't just fear of losing you, but fear of losing herself, the identity she constructed around controlling the relationship and the narrative within it. She must now confront the question: who am I without this control? How do I exist without manipulating the emotional environment to suit my needs? The panic may manifest in various ways: attempts to reach out repeatedly, heightened emotional displays, or even drastic changes in behavior meant to recapture your attention. But beneath these surface actions lies a deeper psychological turmoil, the desperate grasp for a foothold in a reality that feels increasingly unstable. Meanwhile, your refusal to re-enter the old patterns is an act of clarity and self-preservation. You recognize that the relationship as it was unsustainable precisely because of this unhealthy struggle for control. By holding your ground, you are not only protecting your own well-being, but also forcing a reckoning, a chance for true growth, or the acknowledgement that some connections are better left behind. It's important to understand that this loss of control on her part doesn't mean she is inherently bad or malicious. Often it reflects deep-seated fears and insecurities that have been masked by attempts to maintain dominance or influence. Her panic is a symptom of vulnerability, and vulnerability, when unrecognized or unaddressed, can lead to destructive behaviors. For you, witnessing this panic without reacting impulsively requires immense discipline. It's tempting to re-engage out of guilt, nostalgia, or even a desire to soothe the chaos. But true strength is in maintaining boundaries, understanding that genuine change cannot be rushed or coerced. The panic, though loud and unsettling, is not an invitation to return to old habits. Instead, it's a signal that the dynamic has fundamentally shifted. At this juncture, you must remind yourself of the reasons why you stepped away: the necessity of healing, the refusal to participate in toxic cycles, and the commitment to your own growth. Your silence and distance are not signs of weakness, but markers of resolve. Her panic also presents an opportunity for her if she chooses to take it. Faced with the loss of control, she can begin a journey towards self-awareness, learning to tolerate uncertainty, developing emotional resilience, and finding a way to relate to herself without relying on controlling others. This transformation is painful and often resisted, but it is the only path to breaking free from destructive patterns. You, in turn, become a catalyst not by returning or engaging, but by embodying what is possible when boundaries are respected and self-worth is honored. Your absence, paradoxically, can serve as a powerful teacher, showing that emotional maturity involves accepting what cannot be controlled and focusing on one's own integrity. Ultimately, when she starts to panic because she's lost the illusion of control, it signals a critical threshold. It's the point where the relationship either evolves into something healthier, if both parties are willing to grow, or dissolves completely, making space for new beginnings. Your responsibility is to stand firm in your truth, to resist the pull of old dynamics, and to recognize that this panic, while difficult to witness, is part of the process. It's not a failure on your part to endure it, but a necessary phase on the path to freedom for both of you. This is the moment that defines the future, not just for the relationship, but each person individually. The courage to hold your ground in the face of her panic is the courage to create a new reality, one where respect, honesty, and self-responsibility replace control and chaos. That is why you should not give in. When she begins to rebuild herself after the breakup and you maintain your course without slipping back into old patterns, a profound transformation takes place, not just in her, but in you as well. This stage, often overlooked, is where true power lies, because it is a test of character, of resolve, and of who you really are beneath the noise of emotion and past entanglements. It's tempting, after all, when the storm of separation is calmed somewhat, to think about reconnecting, to soften your stance, to say, maybe this time will be different. But you must understand, the healing you engage in after a breakup is not a casual affair. It demands a fundamental reorganization of how you view yourself in the world around you. It's not about erasing the past or pretending it didn't happen. It's about integrating that experience and moving forward with greater clarity and strength. She may watch this from the sidelines and it unsettles her. It unsettles her because when you stop reacting, when you stop engaging in the emotional tug of war, you step outside the familiar drama. You no longer offer the predictable responses that have fueled the cycles of conflict and reconciliation. Instead, you become something more formidable, a person who is anchored, self-awareness, and unwilling to be pulled into chaos again. Her panic in that moment is not just about losing you physically or emotionally. It's about losing the script she once thought she could control. It's about facing a version of you that no longer serves the old narrative. And this, more than anything else, scares her because it means she has to confront herself, her own fears, and the void that was once filled by the push and pull of your interaction. But for you, this is the crucible where you prove your commitment to yourself. The temptation to soften, to give just one more chance, to avoid loneliness or discomfort is powerful. But yielding to that temptation means surrendering the very progress you've fought so hard to achieve. You owe yourself more than a return to instability and confusion. You owe yourself a chance at genuine peace and growth. Healing is messy. It doesn't follow a neat timeline. It involves setbacks and moments of doubt. But each time you resist the urge to retreat back into old habits, you reinforce the foundation of your new self. You build a fortress of integrity that no one can easily breach. This is not about punishing her or making her regret the past. It's about holding yourself to a higher standard, a standard that demands you honor your worth and refuse to be a participant in toxic cycles. She may attempt to test this new foundation to see if you're truly changed or if the old you still lurks beneath the surface. She might try to provoke a reaction, to evoke jealousy, or to remind you of shared history. But if you respond with calmness and clear boundaries, you show her that you are no longer available for that game. You demonstrate that your healing is not a fleeting phase, but a permanent shift. This shift challenges the entire dynamic. It forces her to reevaluate her own patterns, her own need for control or validation. It may trigger regret, not the kind that demands your immediate return, but the kind that initiates her own introspection. Regret that leads to self-awareness is a sign of growth. It means the old story is dying, making way for something new. You might feel isolated in this process because growth often separates us from those who cannot or will not change. But this isolation is necessary. It is the space where true transformation happens. It is a space where you learn to stand alone, to find your own worth, independent of external validation. It is a space that demands courage and discipline. So when you find yourself at this crossroads, remember that the moment she begins to panic because you are healing is the moment you must hold firm. It is the moment that defines your future. It is the moment that distinguishes between relapse into old pain and the emergence of a stronger, wiser self. This is not about revenge or winning a game. It is about respect for yourself and for the process of becoming whole again. When you resist the pull back into dysfunction, you claim your life back. You reclaim your story from the chaos and create a narrative where you are no longer a victim, but an empowered agent of your own destiny. You don't have to look back or explain yourself. Your actions, your boundaries, your calm and steady presence in your own life speak volumes. And in that silent strength, the real message is clear. Healing is not an invitation for manipulation, but a declaration of independence. So stand tall in your healing. Do not apologize for your growth. Do not diminish your worth. The moment she starts to panic because you're moving forward without her is precisely the moment you must refuse to look back. Because that refusal is the ultimate act of respect for yourself and for the possibility of something better.